Hello, everybody. Welcome to JEDI Disruption. These are direct, crisp conversations with leaders on technology and science. And I'm André Lezucco-Pietri. I'm the director of JEDI. As you know, this is the initiative for disruptive innovation. We are launching grand challenges on topics like environment, healthcare, digital, space, and oceans. And today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Marion Guillou. Marion Guillou is doing many things, but among others, she's very well known to have been the CEO of INRAE, which is the very large agronomics institute and research institute here in France. And now she's leading Agrinium, which is basically a consortium of many research centers in the agronomic space. She's sitting on multiple boards. She's also a member of the High Council on Climate. So as you can expect, we're going to have a very exciting discussion. We're going to focus that on the future of food and agriculture. So without further ado, first, Marion Guillou, thank you very much for your time. And
Hello,
so tell us, what, maybe starting with a very general question, what has this crisis taught us and taught you in particular in the topics you know well, food and agriculture?
Well, first remark, the agricultural and food sector has been remarkably resilient. I mean, in Europe, all around Europe, agricultural production went on, food production went on, the retail sector worked well. Workers were courageous enough to go and to be there in the shops. And so we had no big disruption. And that's the first lesson of that crisis, I think. Very important to know about that. And maybe we have to remember that when we think about how we should change those sectors so that we keep this element of resiliency of the sector. The second lesson maybe I would draw from that crisis is about exchange of information about big diseases. Well, we had big diseases for animals. We had big diseases for plants that, traveled with the planes and with the people. As trade goes up, well, all the diseases travel around the world. And from my point of view, we learned a lot about the importance of the speed of information. Because, of course, if you inform very early, then the spreading of the disease is not so huge. So for me, we have to improve the information system at world level and to draw lessons from that incident, well, that crisis, because it could happen again and again. Since 2000, we had at least 4 big crises. So it means that it is more and more frequent because of the importance of trade, the demography, and the density in the world.
Yeah, the word exponential, which was a word limited to mathematicians and experts, is now a word that everybody knows about the curve or flatten the curve. Could this, by the way, happen in the food space? I mean, we hear about
Yes.
the human pandemics, but we had these cases in the. How is the system today resilient to that? How is the food supply resilient to these kind of pandemics?
Well, we had some problems in the food sector. Well, for example, here we did not realize it very well, but there was a big disease for the pigs through China. And it was a disaster. I mean, about 1/3 of the pigs had to be killed. So it's a huge disaster for Asia and for, of course, for all the trade and the prices of the pig meat. We have some olive tree diseases that are going around the world because, and that could be a disaster as well. At the moment, it's in Italy. I think it was found in Corsica recently and in the south of France. And so, diseases like that can be a disaster for a huge industry because, for plants, you need years and years to grow them. Then if you destroy the tree, it takes a lot of years to come back to the previous situation. Yes, so it could happen in the food sector as well, yeah.
I'm going to push you a little bit about more this concept of epizooty. That means these pandemics that go from cattle or from animals to man. There has been a lot of speculation about how much this is linked with the loss of biodiversity, or with the proximity between man and animal. What is your take on that? Is there some science that basically links epidemics and the loss in biodiversity, or is it more assumption and hypothesis today?
Well, what is sure is that demography is very important. And if you have in the same place with a big density, human people and animal living in the same spaces, then you have more probability that the viruses or infections go from the humans to, well, from the animals to the humans and adapt. So of course it's a question of probability. And as in Asia, for instance, well, the density in the city is very big, and you have animals, pigs and poultry living not far away from the human beings. And so that increases the probability of a contact, and then the probability that the diseases crosses the species. And of course, that was the Avarian, disease we had a few years ago. And the other fact is that, more and more there is deforestation. And you have a lot of diseases and viruses in those wild spaces that have never been in contact with human beings. And as you deforest, then you increase the probability that those viruses that are, well, with bats or with animals you don't usually have near your space, that there is increasing probability that there is a contact between humans and those viruses. And that is for
That's
sure.
So let's now push on the frontiers of science. Give us a sense of where today are the frontiers in the food sector. Is this in the area of maybe? Is there a link between data? Agriculture? Is there something? Is there some organs or some type of food which has not been explored? We when we prepared a little bit this discussion, you mentioned to me the whole topic of microbiome. So maybe let's plunge first on agriculture in the 21st century. How much is it different than what we used to do 10 or 20 years ago? And how do you see the future? You talked about density of population. How will we feed 9-10 billion people with always increasing quality and hopefully traceability of food?
Yes, you had the good equation. I mean, how do you feed people in a sustainable way? Because, of course, with the Green Revolution during the 20th century, the agriculture production was multiplied by 2.4, while the population grew by a factor of 2. We were 3 billion people on the planet in 1960 and 6 billion people in 2000. So you know why environment is not just fashion, it's a reality, because the pressure on the planet, of course, increased with this big leap in the population. So, of course, the Green Revolution was about genetics, about machinery, about phytosanitary products. And in fact, it was possible to feed the people far better in the 20s, well, at the beginning of this century than it was in 1960. So the number of people suffering from hunger decreased, the average salary of the people increased, and so the poverty in the world decreased a lot between 1960 and 2000. But of course, the limits on the planet were felt, on water, biodiversity, climate change, and we realized that this Green Revolution has been efficient for providing food, but was no more sustainable for the coming years. And so now the equation is even more difficult. That is to say, how do you feed the people, but in a sustainable way? And so how do you preserve biodiversity? How do you care about greenhouse gases emission and at the same time adapt to the new climate so that the systems are resilient and that you can feed the population? You know that you or I need around 2,200 kilocalories per person per day. And how can we provide this food to every man or woman on the planet? So the first problem, of course, is not a technical problem. It's a question of poverty. It's a question of access. You know that since, well, it's 2017, I think, the number of people suffering from hunger increased again. It had decreased a lot during the previous years, and it increased again because of the conflicts. Of course, when you are a zone with a war or something like that, it's very difficult to get food because you cannot cultivate anymore, you cannot have the animals anymore, and people cannot bring food aid because it's dangerous. So that's the first cause of hunger. Then you have climate change. And more we have problems. You know, in Australia, we had a big drought, you know, about the fires. Yeah, and from year to year, you have big zones of production with climate incidents. And so that's the second cause of hunger. And the third cause of hunger, of course, is poverty and the fact that you don't have access because you cannot buy food. And so the problem is now to be more sustainable when you think about agriculture for the coming years and for the 10 billion people we will have to feed, let's say in 2050. Then how do you increase the production while preserving water, climate, soil, life in the soil, and so on, and the forest, and so on. So the problem will be about this equation. So, well, how can you diversify the cultures so that you keep more biodiversity? You have more resilient problem to, you know, the disease, biology is quite simple. When you have the same kind of plant on hundreds of hectares, then you over-select the parasites. They are very happy because they have the same food everywhere. So diversification is a way to fight big diseases, you know. So we have to reintroduce diversity in our agricultural systems. And that's what we call agroecological practices. And agroecological practices is not coming back to the past. It is, you know, embarking new techniques. You have to put just the quantity of fertilizer you need for the plant and no more, so that there is no leakage in the environment, for instance, so that you don't have you know, the oxide of nitrogen that goes into the atmosphere. So it's all about sensors. It's all about data analysis to know what are the effects of this and these practices. It's all about informing by mobile phones. In Africa, we do that parasites are arriving a few kilometers from your farm, and that you should treat just when it is needed. And so agroecology needs a lot of new technology.
And how much is this today already implemented, and where are the technological frontiers? Because I mean, we just had in France a big green wave in elections, and when you hear some of the debates, there is exactly what you touched upon, this will by some to come back, which obviously is linked with lower yields. So is innovation a way to combine both yield, productivity for people and for also farmers to have a sustainable living, and on the other side preserving the environment? Can you give us some examples of existing, but also maybe also of frontiers that we need to crack in the technological realm?
Okay, it's, you know, it's a problem that is not simple. It won't be only technology, it will be economy at the same time, and social living of the people. Because of course you can put constraints on the farmers and ask them not to use phytosanitary products anymore, for instance. But if you do that, then they need to work more in the field, so that they need to look after the plants to see when the parasites are arriving. And so it's more workforce. So how do you compensate the fact that they can no more use a very cheap phytosanitary product to prevent the disease?
The case of glyphosate is a point in case, right?
Yes, Roundup and glyphosate is a good example because it's very effective and it's not expensive. So of course we need to limit the use of those products, but then it's more work and how do you pay for the works that you have to put in place extra? So the problem is economic as well as technology. It's at the same time. So in Europe, we are lucky enough to have a common agricultural policy. And so the topic could be to link, the green objectives, let's say the sustainable farming practices that we need with some, well, either subsidies, either the fact that we inform the consumer that it has been obtained with a better respect of the natural factors. And if the consumer is ready to pay more for that, if he's confident that traceability is there, so then you will need technology with, some computers, some sensors, maybe some chips within the food, so that you can inform the consumer with confidence. And then maybe some consumers will be ready to pay more for that. So you see, it's always a combination of some technology, economic factors, and the fact that it is possible for the farmers to earn their living from the new practices. So it's what we call the agroecological transition in France. How can we make the system move from one state that is no more sustainable to the next one that all society wants to get to, but make it possible for the farmers to make that transition on an economic, with an economic point of view, a social point of view, and a technological point of view. So all has to move together.
Are there some examples in the world of areas or countries that have embarked on that even faster than the Europeans, or do you see that there is some kind of we're very attached of European leadership being at the forefront? Are we at the forefront of this transition because of the common European policy, or are there other countries that could be good examples?
Well, we had some FAO meeting about agroecological practices, and there were some Chinese people presenting examples in China, and South American people presenting examples in South America. So there is no monopoly about agroecological practices, but you need to have a conjunction of economic, sociological, and technological means that you need to put in place. But it's not only European.
Let's switch to maybe another topic we wanted to discuss. This has more to do with health, the link between basically healthcare and food. It's this whole new frontier about the microbiome. So what really comes at the interface between what we eat and who we are. Tell us a bit what this completely new field that seems to be still relatively undiscovered.
It's it's really a universe, a new universe, because let's say that it's after the years 2000 that it was discovered that we had billions of living organisms in our body that we did not realize we had them. And by trying to understand what composition you have in your gut, then you can understand links between what you ingest and your body. And that's very important for good food prevention, even for some people that have Crohn's disease or diseases like that. By knowing more about your gut composition, your gut microbiota composition, well, you can play with it so that you don't have these very big health problems. So it's both a way to eat better so that you improve your microbiota composition, and to know about your microbiota composition so that you can help your health. So it's really a huge universe with very good example. When you eat, for example, in our country, what we call living yogurt, that you can have yogurt that are without living germs, or yogurts that are with living germs. And we know that there is a difference for the gut microbiota depending on the kind of yogurt you eat. So it's quite interesting to learn about that and to adapt your diet to the target.
I think there are a couple of, especially Danish companies, that became very large and specializing on these additional bacteria, these probiotics, as some call them. Is
Well,
it something
yes.
different than what you mentioned, or is it the ones that you had in mind?
Well, the movement I know about, because you had two scientific movements, one about the microbe system, and that was a French initiative. I can tell you it's Duško Erlich, that is really that was the leader to invent that new science, that new frontier in science. And the American approach, that was more on a microbe by microbe approach. So the two approaches, in fact, had the same idea, that is to say, to understand better how the microbiome makes the links between what you eat and what you are. And so I think now it's a real big innovation field, and you have some companies, in France I can quote Interome, just working on that link. And so of course now it's a global movement. You have companies in every country understanding what can be the plus that such or such microbe can bring you.
Can you tell us about some of the frontiers or some of the areas of research that are still completely open?
Oh yes, when we talk about climate change, you know that the soils are big tanks, big carbon tanks. They can help for carbon storage, and of course it's a problem of the years that are coming, because there is too much carbon in the atmosphere, and we need to store the carbon and to be able to keep it in the storage. And the soil is a very good way to keep the carbon. And so how can we improve, well, for instance, the farming methods, the farming practices, so that we increase the storage of carbon, and we can prove that. And so we need some new sensors. We need, innovation. We need innovation so that we can monitor the carbon storage depending on the farming practices, for instance. And so that you could link the CAP subsidies to the farmers' practices, and you could check the effect of such and such practices. And that's a frontier, because we need the sensor, we need the quick sensor, reliable sensor, so that you can convert new policies into new practices by the farmers. So that's again a frontier, a scientific frontier we should work about.
Marion, you are a scientist, and you see how much science has played a role in the current crisis, and everything you talk to us, food, health, agriculture, obviously has a link with that. But you also talked about exponential and acceleration of time. How do we make sure that policies, and you mentioned that, or economies, are keeping up with that? Isn't the gap widening, and the risk that we are always one? How can we solve that paradox as a scientist? Should we have more scientific councils? What about their democratic legitimacy? I mean, this is a broad question, but I think it's probably you have a very interesting view on this.
Yes, when we talk about scientific frontiers, of course we talk about science science and the public. And it's very important from my point of view that we teach science, that the children are they like science, that they are taught how it works, and that all the citizens are involved in the scientific choices and in the scientific frontiers. Otherwise, you have, for me, the biggest risk is the risk of a rupture between scientists in the labs that could invent marvelous things, but that would be strange things for the citizens, and that won't work, especially in my domain. The farming industry is dealing with the landscape, and the food industry is dealing with what you are. What you eat is what you are. And so it's not possible to have a gap between the public and the producers, and the science has to be understood. And so to understand the science, the citizens need to participate to the choices. And I think it's very important to have the link between the citizens, the scientists, and the producers. Otherwise, it won't be acceptable. The innovation won't be acceptable. And so, well, I'm sure we need more innovation in the new world with the climate change, but we need innovation that is involving society.
And understood. I mean, we obviously need to wrap up, but what could we do better then? And maybe what are the problems we probably don't pay enough attention? You would say, how can we involve more the citizen, and what are maybe the black swans, or as some call about gray rhinos? That means big issues that are in front of us, like pandemics, that we don't pay enough attention. If you conclude on that, Marion.
Obviously, the diets are a real problem for the coming years. Increasing sugar consumption, increasing fat consumption, and then overweight and obesity. So nutrition is one of those black swans. How can we improve our nutrition, knowing that if sugar and fat are so inexpensive, although they have very bad effects on the health of the population, then that's a problem. So again, economy should link with the reality of the effects of consumption. And that, for me, is a big elephant in the room.
Wonderful.
Diets.
Well, on this a bit gloomy picture, but call for action.
Yes, call for action.
Absolutely.
I don't stay on the gloomy picture, but of course we have to work to improve the diets of the people so that we have more health in the population.
Marion, you are a true Jedi with this perspective. So thank you very much for your time. It was fascinating, and see you very soon. And I hope everybody who listened and watched enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you very much, Marion.
Thank you very much, Andre, and thank you very much to all the Jedi movement.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.